next guy we're going to talk about here, Malik Nabers. I think this is
Yep.
really interesting because I've seen a bunch of different spots. I think whatever team he goes to, the versatility and electricity that he brings is going to be a massive asset. Recently, I've seen a little bit of New York Giants at 6, which as an Eagles fan, I absolutely hate. But in the vein of having a weapon that can maybe mask some of the deficiencies of your quarterback in Daniel Jones if you're not going quarterback, I think Malik Nabers is probably the guy as
Yep.
opposed to Harrison or Odunze, because Malik Nabers can get a lot of that short stuff. He can get some of those easy
Totally agree.
checkdowns where Daniel Jones doesn't have to be firing pinpoint deep shots to the sideline to
Yep.
make Marvin Harrison be that elite target that we want. So what do you think is a good spot for Nabers though? Like, we've been seeing Chargers. I think I've seen Titans for him as well. I've seen Falcons for him. It's kind of all over the map in that top 10, but what are you seeing, Wiz?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you kind of set it up pretty well there. I do think he is one of the more, not necessarily pro ready, but like I think he's going to find a way to contribute almost immediately without having to be maybe schemed up and like just, hey, go on the outside, go in there like Marvin Harrison's going to have to, right? I think his ability to kind of be that chess piece and be somebody that maybe a lesser quarterback like a Daniel Jones, has the ability to target, whether it's in the middle of the field or on some of those shorter routes and not have to push the ball downfield versus a guy like, Marvin and Rome. I think there's definitely something to be said there. So I think just the way he slots into kind of this NFL and NFL offenses, because of that versatility that you kind of talked about earlier, Trav, makes him a fit for like almost anybody, right? Like, and that's what's really attractive about him. But like, look, it's very kind of similar to the situation that we just talked through with Kyler, right? Like, you've got Justin Herbert on this massive contract, and you just traded away Keenan Allen. You let you cut Mike Williams and then let him kind of seek elsewhere in free agency. So, that wide receiver room is looking awfully thin right now, right? So it's like, even let Gerald Everett walk from a tight end position. So, wide receiver one in the clubhouse right now is Josh Palmer, right? So like,
Canadian.
like, and like I like Josh Palmer and I think he does some nice things, but like if you have Justin Herbert, like that's not really who you want to supply him with, like as his number one weapon, right? So like as much as we've seen, look, Harbaugh's there, he's a run first guy, he kind of always has been. Do they really like I guess have the balls to like take somebody like a Joe Alt and really build out that line and kind of move away and not give somebody like Herbert that number one wide receiver? I guess it's possible, but like, look, when push comes to shove on draft night, like, and Malik Nabers is staring you in the face, I do have a hard time believing that they're going to trade down from somebody like that. I guess the question then becomes, all right, is this the more likely scenario for a potential trade back, right? Like say Zona sticks at 4 and JJ McCarthy's still there, right? And now somebody wants to come up from whether it's, like let's say Minnesota again, right?
Yeah.
Like if they try to sneak into 5, you're still kind of taking yourself out of the running by going back to 11. So then you're talking about that shuffling of the deck again. So look, Harbaugh's got this pedigree of like, yes, building out the line and everything like that. And maybe there's been a lot of like, hey, we want to run the ball. We want to build the offense. Like it's classic Harbaugh talk. I just think at the end of the day, like it's going to be really hard to pass on a guy like that and give Herbert that number one option. And when we're talking from a fantasy perspective, if Malik does go to the Chargers and he's Herbert's number one guy, like you have to believe that like there's also fantasy fireworks from there day one, right? Like those are two landing spots with really good young quarterbacks that are probably going to be the number one target almost immediately.
Yeah. Think about like the darts that Justin Herbert throws, and then think about them going downfield with Malik Nabers like 10 yards open because he just toasted somebody. Like
Yep.
that's just fun all around. I'm super on the fence though. Like I could see I think I probably lean towards Malik Nabers would be on the board for them and they would still take the tackle. Just because I kind of think with their top of the second round pick, the 37th overall pick, they could
Yep.
still get a pretty talented wide receiver brought in there. And I would just like to note that, as you noted, their wide receiver 1, I love the complete burial of Quentin Johnston, by the way. not even
Yeah.
throwing him out there. I love it. That is what his rookie season was. But yeah, like depleted weapons all around. So I think it would be a great move for them. I might just be a little less confident that they would see Nabers staring them in the face and be like, yeah, that's a no-brainer, just because Jim Harbaugh feels like he's going to be a wild card.
So there is another scenario here, right? Is because when you think about like that kind of that run first offense, kind of want to be multiple out of it, there is a scenario here where maybe they just look at it as adding an offensive weapon for Justin Herbert, right? And what I mean by that is, what if they do get a Godfather offer at 5 from somebody like Minnesota to kind of slide up? Then they slide back to 11. And instead of saying, all right, we need a wide receiver as the offensive weapon, what if we just go ahead and get the tight end as the offensive weapon, right? And then Bowers comes into play for them at, say, 11. And what they've done is picked up another first round pick at 23, right? I do think that's on the table for them as well, especially like, Greg Roman coming in there as the OC. We kind of saw what, how often he targeted a guy like Mark Andrews in Baltimore. Obviously, Bowers isn't this great run blocker, but when you look back at, what they asked Mark Andrews to do in Baltimore, like he's running routes like 88% of the time,
he's not
right?
blocking.
Like, so
Exactly.
So there is a scenario where like, look, the Chargers are kind of depleted of talent, like largely all over skill position wise on the offensive side of the ball. So that is a scenario where if they did pass on Nabers, I could see them just taking Bowers as the weapon and picking up that additional capital.
I think both of those guys would cater to Harbaugh doing some really fun college shit too, like giving them
Yeah.
carries in the red zone and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I like both of those weapons there. And I think those are kind of the ideal guys because they can still play into Justin Herbert's skill sets while still appeasing Jim Harbaugh and giving his offense a lot of that versatility and not having to feel like he has to attach to being a passing offense, which I feel like he will just never do.
Exactly.
Last team I just want to throw out there that I think would be super sexy for Neighbors, but we don't have to go into it, is just the Atlanta Falcons. I think if they added him to Drake London and Kyle Pitts, holy shit. And Bijan Robinson, I don't think it'll happen because they've got some other places they need to shore up for sure. But that's kind of an ultimate sexy chaos pick.
Can you imagine the discourse though, if that happened? Like
It would be
there
insane.
go
It would
all
be
the
insane.
London optimism that we had, like that would be tempered down. And then how do you split targets between, we just had all this hope for Kyle Pitts infused with a guy like Kirk Cousins, and now where does that go? And, then is there enough touches to go around to support somebody like, obviously Bijan's going to get his, but like, how much does that hurt him? I mean, from a discourse and like how many upset people there would be, that would be chaos.